Thank you very much. I am here as the chief economist, but I'm also here as the director of the Singapore office, where we're focusing on infrastructure finance and urban development and trying to support teams around the world to help our clients better. So I'm actually going to talk mostly about finances. But I'm also an avid consumer of at least from Asian urban environments and Asian urban transport systems. And I think I've seen the best and the worst, and I've lived in Jakarta and Manila and Beijing and in Singapore, and I leave it to you to determine what's the best and what's the worst. But I can clearly see that efficient urban transport systems do matter for the efficiency of total urban life and the productivity of people. So from a development perspective, this is a big issue, and it's going to be a bigger issue going forward. We've all heard the numbers, but nevertheless I'm going to repeat them. We are going to have a population of 9 billion by mid-century, and urban share of that is going to increase from 50% to 70%, and that means 2.8 billion people more in cities. That's 14 Singapores every year. So that's a huge challenge. If you think you got Singapore right, do it 14 times every year. And that's a huge challenge if you think about how to get the urban transports, the urban systems, but the urban transport systems as the core, the lifeblood, if you want, of the urban life, right? That's a real challenge. It's a real financial challenge as well, and frankly, we don't have any good numbers. Some of my colleagues try to play around with some numbers, and I like playing around with numbers as well, so I present them to you. If you look at the investment needs for that, the total infrastructure needs for urban development, we estimate at around $750 billion a year in developing countries only, but most of the action is actually in developing countries. That's actually 2005 prices, so on current prices it would be more. 40% of that is just road infrastructure. So if you look at that and you look at the urban side of that, you're talking about $200 billion, and current price probably $300 billion every year in urban road infrastructure financing. McKinsey did a different methodology and looked at what is necessary every year, and they came up with a whopping $600 billion a year in urban infrastructure, in transport infrastructure, but they include airports and harbors and other things which the previous estimate does not include. Irrespective, that's a huge number. The World Bank's lending program was for this year for everything from education to healthcare to, and a little bit of, well, quite a bit of urban transport, but was $40 billion. And if you look at the pressures on the budgets of governments around the world nowadays, this is a really hard number to come up with. If you look at the financial sector developments currently going on, not just because of the crisis and not just because of the European situation, but beyond that, Basel III and different financing, different pressures on the financial world. That's a huge challenge to get that amount of financing going forward. And given all the competing demands, because we're not just financing urban infrastructure as a government, you finance many other things. So the challenge is very big, and we've got to make it right. We've got to make it right, nevertheless, because if you miss it, clearly the efficiency of an economy, clearly the efficiency of indeed 80% of your economy is going to be far less than with an efficient urban transport system. Second consideration, apart from the financing, I believe that if you look at the urban transport systems now, you must deal with climate change. There's no other way, in my view, that we're going to have a solution for climate change, or we're not going to have a solution. Many cities are going to be underwater. Water transport is going to be very important for many cities. But if so, it means that the calculations of the economics of urban transport systems is completely different from what it is today. And since you're putting in systems in place that are going to last 100 years, you have to take into account some notion of what's going to happen with climate change. And I don't know whether you want to put $10 on a ton carbon or 20 or 50, but whatever number you take, you're going to come up with a completely different design of your urban transport system. And I would just like to emphasize that because I think these are very, very big trends. A, keep growth going. B, keep it sustainable locally but also globally. As a matter of fact, if you look at really the local effects of these big pollutants for climate change, even on the basis of local calculations, you would come to a very different choice. If you were to take in all the externalities of urban transport, all the health effects of urban transport, of individual car ownership, let's just say it, you would come to a very different structure. So the key challenges, in my view, actually, I summarize it, they've been mentioned, but I summarize them as minimize the need for transport, optimize within the transport solution, and then sustain financially. And again, the issues have been raised, or the solutions have been mentioned. And that's one is density, the changing of the distribution of activities in the space, in the urban space. And depending on how you do it, you get a very, very different results. And we have our colleague from Shanghai, which is a very different kind of city than Beijing, actually in two ways. In the way the city is designed, with Beijing far more emphasis, the growth is in the suburban areas, and Shanghai has densified its city. But also in the policies, by the way. In the policies in Shanghai where you pay for your license, and in Beijing you get it for free, maybe because there's lots of these red licenses that come from official cars, they don't pay. Shanghai is far more expensive. It means that Shanghai has far fewer cars per person than Beijing. And Beijing has, frankly, no matter whether they have 6 ring roads or not, they now have traffic jams. You can't build against that individual demand. You have to manage it. And you have to build your city such that you can accommodate a far more efficient mode of transport. Not just public transport, but also the walking and the bikes. When I first came to Beijing in the end of the 80s, it was just bikes. You see very few bikes nowadays in Beijing, I have to say. Second, supporting more sustainable modes of transport, including the public transport. But of course the other modes of transport as well. I'm from the Netherlands, so cycling does come naturally. But walking and shortening the trips is going to be very important as well. I'm not talking about the intercity mobility. I was fascinated by the presentation, but I won't speak about that. I do believe that the crux of getting sustainable alternative and sustainable modes of transport, including public transport, lies not just in the management of the public transport, but also in the management of the individual car ownership. If you can't make it much more expensive for the car ownership, the individual car ownership, you won't get people into the public transport. And so that's a politically unpopular move to make, and you mentioned it already. But getting the pricing right on both sides is quite important for the development. I mentioned the reduction in private vehicle use. And the fourth, ensuring financial sustainability of transport systems. And no matter what, even if the individual user doesn't pay for it, if it is not financially sustainable, it won't last. So bringing this financial picture in place, and again, no matter what, whether it is from fees, whether it is from taxes, whether it is from viability, from contributions directly from the budget, the systems that you build have to be sustainable, because if not, they will not last. That's easily said and done. I mentioned the pressures on the financial sector side. I mentioned the pressures on the budget, but there's lots of institutional issues that keep countries and cities from bringing about sustainable financial systems. And that includes the governance constraints, and not just the governance constraints as coordination between departments, that's important, but also governance as in making sure that the money is being used well. The legal constraints. It's surprising to me how many cities in East Asia still lack the authority to issue bonds, still lack the authority to raise money independently, and rely on very inefficient intergovernmental fiscal arrangements that simply do not cut it in terms of volume of money. And finally, yes, to make things sustainable, people have to pay for it. How much one pays, one can determine. That is a policy choice, but you either pay through taxes or through fees or through something else. And it's the political challenge that many countries in the region still have to overcome, the political challenge that actually you get what you pay for, and if you pay a bit more, your transport systems will be far better. Thanks for now.